I'm thrilled that I think we're going to have a very, very interesting conversation today, our first session for our Lunch and Learn series for 2009. I'm going to tell you that sometimes the world offers you little gifts, and when I opened my email this morning, there was an electronic flyer from someone, and it started with this quote from Marshall McLuhan. It said, "We shape our tools and they in turn shape us." And I thought, perfect, that's a great way to introduce Jesse Hirsh. Jesse, as it happens, was educated at the McLuhan Center at the University of Toronto. Now, when Jesse and I first talked about him coming here, we were talking about the Obama campaign and how social media had played such a huge part in that, and that was the kernel of what we discussed that he would talk about today. And it is part of what he's going to talk about today, but he's going to talk about social media in politics and what we can learn from that as marketers, as people who are communicating with broader audiences. So with that, Jesse Hirsh.
Thank you, Sheila. I will sort of be looking at the Obama campaign, but almost indirectly. I'd like to spend some time talking about the Republican efforts as a juxtaposition to sort of dispel the myth that the Obama campaign was the only campaign to successfully employ social media. But even to go further and look at the globalization movements, which I was personally involved in, and I feel really set the stage for initially the Howard Dean campaign, but very much the Barack Obama campaign. And really what I'm trying to get across is I don't believe in the sort of great individual of history thesis, but rather that history is much broader, much cultural, much social. Even if there are individuals like Barack Obama who come to embody that, who come to symbolize that, I don't necessarily feel that the credit should go to them, but that the credit goes to everyone and everyone who participates in that. And I mean, if any of you remember, sort of pre-9/11, the anti-globalization movement was really where internet and politics was most active. It was where grassroots organizations were employing what we didn't call social media at the time, but I will call social media retroactively, tools to empower people, to streamline organization, to allow for accelerated response to incidents, to campaigns. And as we all know from a lot of those events, they were successful in that they really drove the pro-globalization forces underground. Really what I think we saw in the Howard Dean campaign and the Barack Obama campaign are the children of the anti-globalization movement really almost achieved the impossible in overcoming the Clinton machine, which at one point was considered inevitable to win. I think it makes more sense to look at the Republicans and to use the Republicans as a contrast, which is not to say I won't talk about the Obama campaign, but it is to say I feel that there's an abundance of information out there, and I'd like to offer an analysis that I don't feel is as common. Anyone here know Ron Paul? A few people nodding their heads. Ron Paul, at a time, was compared to Obama. In the early days, because you have to remember, the last US election was kind of the longest in American history. It was effectively 2 years in that a number of presidential primary candidates declared their candidacy early. And Obama, the reason that he declared so early was because everyone was saying, you can't beat Hillary, you can't beat the machine. And so for a while, he was almost a fringe candidate. Not really a fringe candidate in that his policies were mainstream, but a fringe candidate in the sense that the Democratic establishment wasn't taking him that seriously. And parallel to that was Ron Paul. And Ron Paul, for those who don't know, is I believe, a 6-term Texas congressman who is a libertarian. But the reason that the Obama campaign and the Ron Paul campaign were compared is because on social media sites, on Facebook, on MySpace, they were the most popular. And a lot of people were going, as Obama sort of started to rise and started to become more credible and started to develop a novel type of political organization, a lot of people were kind of scratching their head and going, how come this fringe guy is able to do the same and sometimes even better? We look at the Obama campaign in part because of the money that they were able to raise and the way that money connected to new voters. That traditionally politics was really looking at maximum amount of donations. If the maximum was $1,000, they'd go out and try to hit people up for $1,000. And so retroactively people say, well, the Obama campaign was great because they asked for $5. And when you ask for $5, you get new people in the system, and then you can keep sending them emails over the weeks and months of the campaign and continue to raise as much funds as possible. Well, the myth is that the Obama campaign invented that or perfected that when the Ron Paul campaign did it first. And it started with Guy Fawkes Day, which I believe is November 5th, 2007, in which the Ron Paul campaign raised $4 million in a single day, which at the time was a record in US political history. Now, before that happened, he was still kind of an internet wonder, and people were sort of saying, well, this won't really translate into political support, so let's ignore him. But then the Republican Party said, oh my God, this guy now has more money than all the other candidates. And the Democratic Party said, hey, this guy's on to something. Then came the anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, which I believe was December 12th, some early December, in which Ron Paul raised $6 million. So all of a sudden, everyone's going, where is this guy coming from? How is he getting this money? And the irony, which was not lost on the Obama campaign, was that the Ron Paul campaign had nothing to do with it, had no involvement in it, had absolutely no hand in either the fundraising or the popularity that they were experiencing on the internet. It was 100% spontaneous. And to some extent, the Republican Party is in a bit of a crisis of identity, right? George W. Bush, who certainly appeals to a certain base, alienates a lot of small C conservatives who felt that he expanded government, right? Given that one of the pillars of small C conservative philosophy is small government. So this revolt found itself in the Ron Paul campaign, partly young people, partly disaffected, partly people who were upset with Washington politics. But it's harnessing that spontaneous energy. It's harnessing that grassroots energy. You can't necessarily create it. You can facilitate it. You can catalyze it. The key is identifying it and responding rapidly so you can harness that. That's what the Ron Paul campaign did first, and did amazingly. And did in a way, almost to their detriment, that they never really tried to control it. They never tried to take ownership of it. They allowed it to be free and spontaneous. And I'll come back to that in a moment, but I want to shift to the other Republican candidates and how they were looking at the Ron Paul campaign and attracting to it. And to some extent, what happened was Mike Huckabee. Because for a while, I mean, Mitt Romney and Rudy Giuliani were, for a long time, considered the front runners. And Mike Huckabee came out of nowhere. It was actually viral videos like this one that really gave Mike a leg up.
An important policy message from Governor Mike Huckabee.
The volume on this is...
My plan to secure the border, 2 words. Chuck Norris.
Mike Huckabee's a lifelong hunter who'll protect our Second Amendment rights.
There's no chin behind Chuck Norris's beard, only another fist.
Mike Huckabee wants to put the IRS out of business.
When Chuck Norris does a push-up, he isn't lifting himself up. He's pushing the earth down.
Mike's a principled, authentic conservative.
Chuck Norris doesn't endorse. He tells America how it's going to be.
Now, to give you some context,
I'm Mike Huckabee, and I approve this message. So did Chuck.
Chuck Norris approved.
Now, to give you some context, Chuck Norris, previous to this, had been part of a sort of equivalent of Rickrolling. Did everyone here know what Rickrolling is in terms of Rick Astley and Never Gonna Give You Up? So yeah. Chuck Norris had been part of a whole genre of internet memes, of people being, oh yeah, well, Chuck Norris will take you out, and this whole, and again, it's all like cacophony. But what Huckabee did is he said, how do we tap into that? How do we take, and there's a brilliance here, which I'll get to when I get to Canadian politics, of not trying to recreate viral media, just switching the narrative a little. Taking viral media that's already proven, that's already tested, and you flip the script. You change the words. You make a slight alteration. Nothing wrong with that. That's the nature of a mashup, and that's what Mike Huckabee did with Chuck Norris. This worked so successfully that for 2 months after this, every public appearance Mike Huckabee made, Chuck Norris was right behind him. And like the idiocy of it, there's no policy to this. This is comedy. But it was comedy that for a while really worked. And the Republican establishment was scared shitless. I mean, they were really worried about Huckabee because he was kind of like Paul. He was anti-establishment. He was, for the most part, anti-Bush. I mean, he had gone on The Daily Show and had slagged the Bush administration. So he was someone who was galvanizing the grassroots and was a real threat to Romney and Giuliani. At the same time, McCain ran out of money. McCain's campaign basically had run aground. They laid off all their staff, and McCain had to mortgage 4 or 5 or 6 of his many houses. But McCain started looking at viral videos himself. He said, we don't have any money, we don't have any ability to really have TV advertising, but making a viral video is simple. And his viral videos, unlike Chuck Norris, were fun but not silly. But they worked. And it worked because people started talking about it. So all of a sudden, McCain's fortune started going up because he started to make use of cheap and accessible media. But if you recall, McCain's comeback was New Hampshire. And New Hampshire was all about town halls. And if town halls aren't the most base level of social media, then I don't know what is. So what I'm trying to get at here is really what we're seeing is a climate, not so much a tool. The climate lends itself to multiple tools, but really the issue is messaging. And you can go over Obama's messaging and see how it's inclusive and see how it's inspiring and see how it creates the milieu of a social movement, which is why I sort of see it as a child of the anti-globalization movements. But the same is true of the Republican side. And the reason I'm sort of bringing this up in terms of the Republicans was I really felt it was their election to lose, right? Understand that America is really 2 nations, and that those 2 nations are very polarized, and that even if Obama can get new voters to the ballot, that won't guarantee victory. Not to mention that the Democrats won the 2000 and 2004 elections, even though they didn't become president. And the reason that I feel that the McCain campaign lost, that they blew it, was A, they failed to appropriate the energy of the Ron Paul campaign. Because that was millions and millions of dollars that they could have used in the last 2 months of the campaign. When around, I believe it was April, either March or April, I went for a road trip down in the south, basically to South Carolina. And one of my purposes was to look at political science. And to look at which communities were Democrat, which were communities were Republican, who supported Obama, who supported Clinton. I was blown away by Ron Paul. Ron Paul was everywhere. Every highway, every street, every town, everywhere. And they called it the Ron Paul Revolution. And again, the viral videos, the websites, the signs, the local meetups were overwhelming. And the fact that the Republican Party, the fact that the McCain campaign made no effort, made no interest in courting this constituency of their own party is why they lost. And to some extent, you could say it's the failure to embrace the grassroots, that the Obama campaign did embrace the grassroots, mobilized the grassroots, employed the grassroots in as deep as they wanted to be in the campaign. One of the critiques I have of the Obama campaign, and this is a critique that it was easy for me to make before they won, whereas now that they won, well, it really doesn't matter because they won, which was that they went 95% of the way, but forgot that last 5%. And for me, this was a juxtaposition with the Ron Paul campaign. That what I felt was brilliant about the Ron Paul campaign is they did not try to control anything. And because they didn't try to control anything, well, they weren't responsible for it. So I was really pissed off when Barack Obama sold out Jeremiah Wright, his pastor and reverend. And in my mind, I thought, what a jerk that you have to sell out your preacher to become president. And I believe that he didn't really want to do that. That he's an adult, an intelligent person who can say, yeah, I don't agree with what he's saying. Because I can be friends with people. I'm friends with lots of Republicans, even though I don't agree with their politics. And I'm friends with all sorts of people, even though I think some of the things they say are totally ludicrous. But the fact that he had to write them off alienated a whole bunch of people. Granted, obviously not enough that it mattered. But he didn't have to do it. And not only that, he could have ran the campaign, and I feel won by a larger margin, and raised more money if he had just let go a little bit. I certainly feel that the Obama campaign deserves a lot of credit. There's a lot of lessons that I haven't I focus more on the Republican, but I encourage you to look at some of the research that's now coming out. But I think the issue is not going to be what we've just seen, but what we're going to see. It's going to be the next year. It's going to be the next 2 years. Because, you know, let's face it, Obama got elected on a ticket of hope, right? On a ticket of change. He has to deliver. If he doesn't deliver, well, then it all means shit. And it doesn't really matter that all these people got involved in the election campaign.